Well, hello, Shiny Crafty People. Tim Totten here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk to you about doing something other than binding a quilt. I love making quilts, but gosh, some of the finishing work is really crazy, and binding a quilt is one of those things that I kind of just want to be done fast. I'm going to show you how to face a quilt rather than bind it, and this makes it so much faster, and it can work in the right situations. Now, I first saw this in a video just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to link it in the description below. If you're on like mobile or something, you should be able to touch the title of this video and it'll bring up the description. If you're on a desktop, it's super easy. It's below the video, not hard to find. Now let me tell you what that means. Binding a quilt sort of looks usually like you folded over the fabric, like the fabric has been folded over at the corners and you get like a different fabric, or you at least see this line, right? But imagine if we could actually face a quilt this way. Look, all of the material that faced it is on the back. It's pretty crazy. Let me give you a better example. This one literally has been faced. You can tell because you can see the stitching. It's been faced with material this way. All right, why don't you join me down here at the cutting table? I'll show you how we do quilt facing. All right, so typically binding is made with, it goes around the edge, right? It's gonna sew around the entire edge of that piece and it goes to the back and the front. But we want something that would look like if it was on the back, but then on the front, you literally get it's literally flat. You can't see any of that. Well, I put a stitch that's quite bright, you would see, but I want you to notice that everything is on the back and that's facing. So what we're gonna need is a strip. Now I'm doing a 2.5 inch strip here, and you'll notice that this was a 2.5 inch strip that I folded in half. If you don't want as much bulk, you could do a strip that is 1.5 and just fold the edge down 1/4 inch. But that's like a lot of work to figuring out that exact sizing, and I don't want to have to do that. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and just get a 2.5 inch strip that I fold in half. Now some people use larger squares for the corners. In fact, this one uses a 4-inch square, and it's so big. I did contrasting fabrics so you could see the difference here. I think this is too big. So in fact, I would prefer to go to this is a 3-inch square, and you can imagine this would be a bit smaller here, right? But I've actually done a little measuring of what these would look like if I had them coming together in a corner. And I like to do, this is a 2.5 inch square, and we put that on, it's literally going to just cover those 2 points. I want it to be kind of that close, so I'm going to use the 2.5 inch square here. So we need some 2.5 or 3-inch squares. You just pick, if you want a little bit of leeway, use a 3-inch square. 2.5 inch of your fabric that has been folded in half, and then of course you need your quilt. So I'm going to use this quilt fabric right here. This is a pre-made quilt that I had from Walmart, and we're going to count this as the front. So what we're going to do actually is lay out our materials so that everything is on the front of it. So if you were using the piece that you had just folded an edge, you would lay that along the edge like this. Now, but first you have to put your squares in the corners. So what we're going to do is fold this square in half and put it into the corner. Here we go. Right to this corner. I'm going to use some pins to hold this in place. And the reason you're putting this down first is that anything that goes on top of it will then get flipped over to the other side, and then this part will form the edge. So we've done that in the corner, and then you would come along and put this here along the edge. Now, I don't want to use this particular kind like I told you. I'd rather use the other one, so I'm going to do it with my raw edges right here facing the edge of the quilt. You just want to make sure it goes over the center point of the square. So you got to put it far enough to go over the center point of the square. And this is really a great opportunity to use clips. I just don't have my clips out right now, so I'm not going to use them. I'm just going to use some pins. And I'm only going to be sewing along the edge when we first do this. So I'm not at all worried about putting the pins here in the inside. They can come out when we go. And then, what's fun is you don't have to go all the way to the other edge, because I would put this one as well in here, the other corner piece. Remember, it goes down first. And I'm going to use my walking foot with this, so it goes over all these layers. Remember, this is quilted here. And then I'm going to bring another piece and go and make sure it just goes over the center point. So again, it needs to go over the center point there and be pinned in place. Now you would use long strips of this, obviously, if you're doing a full quilt. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna sew all the way around our quilt. Let's go to the sewing machine for that. So I'm gonna come in, if I had the entire fabric around, I would just sew all the way around. I'm just gonna go from this corner here with our walking foot, and I'm gonna use a 1/4 inch seam allowance as we walk around this entire thing. Now, for some reason, it is still, it's not walking anywhere near the way it's supposed to. Well, we'll see how it goes. Ah, yes, there we go. So I'm going to take out all my pins. So the next step is going to be to stitch down each of these sections so that we can flip the entire thing over. This is a step you can skip if you want to, but I think it's helpful for us to stitch this down. It stitches that flap open. All right. Our next step, of course, is to come back and trim these edges. And that's because we have to turn this corner. So I'm actually going to trim. Now, I've got a little bit extra into this corner than I wanted out of this fabric. And I will show you that what I did was I came in, and that's why I used the black thread here so you could see. I'm going to take quite a lot out of it so that when we turn it over, there's not a lot to flip there. So our first step is to flip over right to the edge here. See, remember, we're wanting to face it, right? That gets flipped over completely on both sides. And then we'll turn our corner inside out. Now you definitely want to use some kind of a pointer tool. I have this pointer tool here, and I'm going to go in there and push out that point to make sure it stays out. And now when I flip these and flip that, now we can come back. And I'm going to use the iron and just flatten this all the way across the front. And I'll be right back. So I've trimmed that at the iron, and what I want to show you is I had actually clipped this fabric a little too close right in here when I clipped it. You want to be careful of that. But I'm going to be able to fix that because I can come in and make sure I catch it as I'm stitching. So I'll start at this end. I'm just going to edge stitch right along that material, and I'm stitching from the wrong side. Now you have a couple options. You don't have to stitch this with the machine. You could actually stitch this by hand, and if you did it by hand, it's going to hold it a little more closely. I'm going to do it with my machine because I want to be done quicker than if I was stitching it by hand. But if you were stitching, you could easily stitch this by hand, and if you're used to finishing up a bound quilt that way, then this isn't much different. So now what we've done is we've been able to create that facing, and on the other side, look, there is absolutely none of that binding showing that we would have on a regular bound quilt. Let's go up and I'll show you a little bit more about what you would use this for. So that shows you what it looks like. You can actually see here I didn't turn this square over, so that was what it looked like. And then of course I had flipped all those fabric pieces over. You'll notice there. And here's that corner that I did. Now, one of the fun things about this is you get a nice finished edge, right, of your quilt. And if you're doing like a quilt, a hanging, an artistic hanging, and you didn't want, and you just had sort of a plain, it was a plain and you didn't really want a border or that fabric of having, you know, a different color fabric here, you could do it this way. And here's what's also fun. Imagine you needed to hang this and you wanted to hang it in an easy way and it was something small, you could use a dowel rod, cut that to the right size. And because our stitching line goes here and doesn't go through the line of the corner there, we can actually put a dowel rod into that, and then it can be used for a hanging. Now, if the hanging is bigger than a dowel rod, or it starts to droop in the middle, you know, if it was sort of drooping in the middle, you could just stitch a little tab on the back that would hold it through. But this would make it super easy to hang that. Look how easy that is. I actually have that stick in the back there, you know. There you are. Well, thank you for joining me with a much different camera than I normally use. I'll get back to my regular camera soon, but that is how to face a quilt so that all of the material that you faced it with is on the back. And of course, if you used a matching thread instead of this black thread, it would, of course, look a little more obvious in there. And it wouldn't be so obvious what I mean. And it went super fast, way faster than having to do all those funky corners. All right, until next time, I hope you try out this facing technique and stay crafty. Bye for now. This is gonna make binding quilts so much easier.